Quentin Tarantino. He's a director that can't be compared to many. His films are so revolutionary and bizarrely diverse that big-time film nerd, goblin, and just all-round possible maniac, Tarantino has been called the most influential director of this generation. Yeah. And it makes sense, he was the pioneer in meta filmmaking, and he was the first huge step into postmodern film, so yeah, I'll give that one to him. The man behind films such as Kill Bill, Django Unchained, and Glorious Bastards. I don't really know who this exposition bit is for, because I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with Tarantino and his works. He's that popular. By definition, Quentin Tarantino is an auteur. A filmmaker whose individual quirks give a film its personal and unique stamp. And Tarantino is the perfect example of an auteur. In fact, long ago he surpassed the idea of an auteur stamp, and he now created his own genre and even his own cinematic universe. His films are both genre-centric and stylistically uniform, usually telling the dramatic revenge story. Taking a general look at his film catalogue though, one trait seriously stands out. There's lots of blood. The man is known for his indulgence in uses of ultra-violence, and some even state that crazy blood and gore are central and even necessary for his work. Violence is present in pretty much every Tarantino flick. The man and ultra-violence aren't two things you can just separate, but for this editorial we'll be honing in on 3 focused films: Django Unchained, Pulp Fiction, and Kill Bill Volume 1. Nothing perfect, I just don't like the part 2 so much. I don't know, it's all went down. Tarantino is a fan for making his take on famous or dying genres. Gangster movies, westerns, samurai films, World War II films. But it's specifically noted the man does seek out purposely violent genres. It's probably down to them just being his personal favourite. Tarantino is a huge film nerd, and several of these genres make it onto his top 11 lists he publicly released. Whoa, Battle Royale? That actually makes complete sense. Gore in popular film is nothing new. There's an entire market made for people bloodthirsty to see stabbing and horror and death, and it's nothing surprising. But Tarantino's gore is done for a different purpose. It's known for its exaggerated and sometimes just straight up silly nature, which in turn makes it really memorable and often a subject of controversy. He indulges in violence to create the movie's tone, ultimately giving the violence a personality. This not only drives the narrative, but for the same reason the Romans loved the Colosseum and Shakespeare loved a bloodbath, it's just pure entertainment at its most basic, primitive form. This is most obvious in 2012's Django Unchained.
I like the way you die, boy.
To capture the true nature of slavery, Tarantino relishes in all kinds of violence. There's racial torture, deaths played for laughs, and even a bloodbath shootout finale. Scenes involving slaves being fed to dogs and straight up torture aren't shied away from. This extreme violence is there to remove the romanticism element that Hollywood has put on slavery. He wants to show the audience the extent of the subject and then to provoke a response. The style Django Unchained's violence takes is characterised into really quick, harsh and just vengeful moments of strike. Every significant moment in this film is brutal and instant. Like all of Tarantino's films, the violence is stylised to reflect the depiction of the film it appears in. In this case, it's the sudden bleak intensity of Django's visual violence that reflects the tone and subject matter of the film, because it doesn't hold back. Tarantino uses gore to play his audience. The violence for the most part, such as, Candy's involvement in the Mandingo fighting scene, is directed to shock and offend, but ultimately to force disgust onto the villain. The scene is really bloody and relentless, depicting 2 black men fighting to the death for sport, being cheered on by an audience of white men. The truly striking effect of this scene comes from the sound effects: necks broken, bones being snapped, and finally an eye being gouged out. None of this is shown, but the implication is enough. To make it worse, the end of the fight is met with celebration and cheers, to purposely contrast the reaction of the film's audience, instantly separating Candy from the audience's empathy from the moment he's introduced. Candy's involvement in the scene is perverted and gleefully childlike. Also, much later in the film, Candy makes an aggressive speech to intimidate and control Django. He presents the skull of a black man, and his own twisted reasoning explains how black men aren't as intelligent. He brings out Django's wife and dramatically crushes her hand with a hammer, using the blood as a visual prop as he wipes over her face. Much in the way Tarantino does to the audience, actually. Candy is a complex and warped character whose sense of violence and attempt to preach his ideals are one and the same. They're inseparable, much like the violence in Tarantino's film, and the two can't be separated.
To the man with the exceptional beard and his unexceptional nigger.
This moment of sheer villainy is again shown to make Candy just purely hateable, because this is also a trend of Tarantino villains. There's always that scene where they assert authority and villain status in a sudden moment of violence.
Now, if any of you sons of bitches got anything else to say, now's the fucking time! I didn't think so.
It's a quick and effective way for a bleak moment of violence to set up a villain and just help the plot. Tarantino uses violence for a variety of reasons. Kill Bill is the most basic reason. When interviewed, Tarantino says that violence makes good cinema. And this is evident, as violence is the bulk of this Tarantino two-parter. Blood splattering and themes like rape and revenge earn this film an 18 rating, but the violence has character. The central villain of Kill Bill Volume 1 is killed in a manner both just bizarre and disgusting. And when the Crazy 88s are cut down at a crazy rate, blood explodes out of the goons, no matter how weak the strike was. Now it's clear Kill Bill is a homage to the samurai movie genre, and by making the gore so exaggerated, the violence is characterised and it's recognisably from Kill Bill, making the ultra-violence just as much a character as the bride herself. The violence in this film can't really be compared to the likes of Django or Pulp Fiction, because of how oddly non-violent the excessive violence is, if that makes sense. Tarantino defenders insist that this choice is purely stylistic and cartoony. They insist it's more Tom and Jerry than Apocalypse Now. And then you realise the absurdity of the action is what distances it from actual horror. We don't think of it as a violent killing, so much as a homage to Hong Kong cinema of a spaghetti western. Kill Bill's violence is to parody and entertain rather than horrify or shock. Again, Tarantino is a massive film nerd. He's not a psychopath. And then there's Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction, being a dialogue-driven film, instead has less violence, and even though most key players within the story carry guns and kill, it serves a different purpose. The mundane and yet fun dialogue between Jules and Vincent entertains, but also establishes their apathy for wherever they're headed. As hitmen, they have themselves become desensitized to violence, and have come to terms with the fact that it's just another aspect of day-to-day life. The pathetic and routine exchanges they share strongly juxtaposed with violent acts they then go out and commit. There are lots and lots of scenes where violence is subtly mixed with comedy in Pulp Fiction.
Does he look like a bitch? What? Does he look like a bitch? No! Then why you try to fuck him like a bitch, Brett? Ain't a opinion.
Well, you gotta have an opinion. I mean, do you think that God came down from heaven and stopped you?
Oh, what the fuck's happening? Oh,
man,
shit, man.
Oh, man, I shot Marvin in the face.
Why the fuck you do that?
I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident.
These scenes are perplexed because it's somewhat confusing to know even just how to react to it. Another favourite quirk of Tarantino's. This just further accentuates the pure fun Tarantino takes in his violent tendencies. Tarantino has addressed this method of violence manipulation and openly admits it's a skill of his. Quote, "I work in crime films, martial art movies. I guess there's gonna be a fight or two. In movies, violence can be cool. I specialise in making you laugh at things that aren't normally funny. You mix darkness for light. It's a dark script. But you pick Bruce Willis, John Travolta, and Uma Thurman to have a light essence, and if you mix out the darkness, you have humour." The suddenness of Pulp Fiction's violence also sets it apart from the others. The transition from violence into comedy, or vice versa, can almost be instant. This element is also seen in Django Unchained. Think the Jonah Hill starring comedy scene before a KKK raid, and the several hundred cinemas full of laughter when Mrs. Candy is shot, even though it may have not even been played for laughs. That at its heart, Tarantino has never betrayed his roots of being a hardcore film fanatic. For him, films are about immersion, and to him, a reaction-provoking film is a good film. Tarantino is a man very familiar with film conventions, and he's aware of the role his ultraviolence plays in his work, and how with it, he can explore the medium of film itself. Editing is crucial to the manipulation of the violence. We can separate ourselves mentally, but not emotionally from the gore on screen, because the horror of the event is ultimately not in our hands. The contract between Tarantino and audiences is that the experience is one that is totally being controlled. Here, have a look at this scene. The climax of Django Unchained actually ends with Schultz and Django ready to leave. There's no guns fired, and there's no end fight about to break out. Whilst the main characters have lost, the conflict is ended with words, not guns. An unconventional and surprising step for Tarantino.
You really want me to shake your hand? I insist. If you insist.
Just as you think it's about to wrap up, the film then decides not to finish it. Schultz's final act is shooting Candy, remarking,
I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
which is when the shootout finale actually begins. This is so Tarantino directly speaking to both his critics and the audience. He's being self-referential to his use of ultraviolence, and at this point he's just openly embracing it. Django is unique again in the fact that it's the only Tarantino film that does not cover up the violence when it gets too intense or doesn't serve a purpose. Meanwhile, the opening to Kill Bill is shown in grayscale and focused on her to hide the murder of the bride's baby. Pulp Fiction blurs violence and just turns it into comedy instead. And Inglourious Basterds shows several Jews being shot through floorboards without cutting them dying. It's implied and therefore unnecessary, so it's clear Tarantino does try and avoid the distasteful, and he just aims for entertainment, not just crazy film anarchy. With elements of all of these uses of ultraviolence in Django, it's fair to say that this film's violence is the amalgamation of his previous works, and maybe even a reply to critics of his work. And that is why there is so much blood in Quentin Tarantino movies. Nice.